he signed out a memo that I think it's called the Defense Innovation Memo. And that was the genesis for standing up the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, DIUX as it was called then, now
Yeah.
just DIU, so much further down the road. And what the intent there was to bridge that gap, that valley of death between the Department of Defense, who was interested in all the standard legacy hardware systems, and what was happening in Silicon Valley, to actually put a forward outpost called DIUX out there in Mountain View, California, to serve as that matchmaker between these new tech companies that had not been paying attention to the government and what the department's needs were. So that was the beginning of that. But more concrete, regardless of Secretary of Defense Ash Carter's memo, what I was involved in at the time when I was a 3-star general in the Pentagon in my final 5 years in uniform, I had a different job. This was not an AI job to begin with, but what I was doing was running a high-level steering group on intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance processing, exploitation, and dissemination, what we call PED. Just a fancy word for saying all these different sensors are providing all sorts of data that then needed to be turned into information, and then Intel analysts would then take that and turn it into high-quality, actionable intelligence. The problem was we were dealing with more information from more sources, from unclassified open source all the way up to exquisite classified intelligence, than in quite literal terms than at any point before in history. And we had run out of humans to be able to deal with that workload. So we met as a group of very senior people in our regular steering group and said, what do we do about this? Everybody recognized the problem was only going to get worse. Especially, we all anticipated at some point we're going to be coming out of the Middle East and shifting our attention elsewhere on the world. But the Middle East was not going away. So could we use something else to make up for the loss of people over years? That became the basis. So we had a meeting one day, and there was a Marine Corps colonel. His name is Drew Kukor. He was fairly new at the time, but he was a bulldog to say the least. And we turned to Drew, and I said, Drew, figure out how do we solve this problem. Too much information, not enough human analysts. And when they do look at it, it was really mind-numbing work. 10 hours looking at video, maybe seeing 15 minutes worth of horrendous things that they then had to react to very quickly. And so Drew and his number two, also a Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel reservist, Joe Larson, went around and looked across the Department of Defense and didn't see anything. They were hearing related to this memo, Secretary of Defense Carter has signed out, hearing about these things from DIU Experimental, saying there's other technologies out there, but they couldn't find it in the Department of Defense. And what they found invariably was we have it, but it's about 6 years from being